you?
Fine,
We are
thank you.
sorry, continuing the laws of Meiser, tithing, chapter 10. So we learned that there's um, a rabbinic law that was created called the Mai. Like, what is this? Meaning, when it came to Truma, which is given to the Kohen, the 2% and the 1% from the Trumas Meiser, that it is holy. And if you don't, there's a severe consequence from heaven. So people were much more careful. When it came to Meiser, the 10%, also perhaps it's a larger amount than 2%, people weren't so careful giving their 10% to the Levite. So it's made a ruling that it comes from someone who is a simple, unlearned um, person who is not trustworthy, who may not be trustworthy, then it was considered demai as if it's a questionable produce because maybe it was not taken from it the meiser, the tithing. So in chapter 10, halacha number 1, when a person makes a commitment to be considered trustworthy with regard to tithes, so that his produce will not be considered demai, right? Questionable. He must tithe the produce he eats, that which he sells, and that which he purchases. He may not accept the hospitality of a common person because that person is not considered trustworthy. Okay. He must make these commitments in public. When trustworthy witnesses by that he made these commitments in public and that he continually observes these practices, he is considered trustworthy and his word is accepted. If he says that his produce has been tithed, right? Very, interesting that. So, in other words, a commoner, not a learned person, um, who may not be so careful in his observance, but if he publicly declares that he's taking upon himself that he will be, so then we trust him. Every Torah scholar is always considered trustworthy. There is no necessity to investigate his conduct. His children, the members of the household, the servants, and his wife are given the same status. When a Torah scholar dies and leaves produce, even if it was gathered on the day of his death, we assume that the appropriate separations were made. Right? Because the household, he trains them, right? So he trains them that they need to be careful with taking Meiser. When the daughter of a common person or his wife marries a chaver is this person who is accepted upon himself to be trustworthy, or a servant of a common person was sold to a chaver, they must accept the above requirements as at the outset. So they need to accept because they weren't raised this way, right? and they have a history of non-observance of Meiser, so they have to declare that they will be observant, right? When the daughter of a chaver or his wife marries a common person, or the servant of chaver was sold to a common person, we assume that they maintain their observance. But the other way around, right? The daughter of a chaver, she was brought up this way, right? They now marry a common person. We assume that that person will continue with their observance until they act in a manner that arouses suspicion. A son of a servant, or a son or a servant rather, of a chaver, since a servant has the same because they're being trained, right? You train your children to act and observe, you train them to keep Shabbos, right? So you train them to keep the laws of tithing. Sorry. Sorry, lost my place over here. Okay. A son or a servant of a chaver who frequently would visit common person must formally accept the above requirements. Because they're hanging out and others are getting their education from a common person. When a son or a servant of a common person would frequently visit a chaver, as long as he is in his domain, he's considered like a chaver. When he departs, he's considered like a common person. Interesting. When a person himself is not considered as a trustworthy, but one of his sons or servants or another member of the family is, food may be taken from him based on their statements. We do not harbor suspicion concerning the matter. Others taken from the son. Okay.
Food is everywhere. The person was not considered trustworthy or the son or the servant. It says food will be taken from.
Oh, meaning from the, from the family, based on the statement of the son, I'm sorry,
Yes.
whose statements? The statement of the one who's trustworthy. In other words, if I say that that you know that Yaakov is trustworthy, right? Let's say I'm a trustworthy person coming to this, right?
Not trust.
Right, and I am
But one of the sons of servants is.
right.
This is saying that food will be taken from the person who is.
So if I will say that this family that you can trust that he took Meiser, so you can have food from that family. I'm saying about my family, let's say, right? That's what I'm saying about my family that isn't trustworthy, right?
But you are trustworthy.
But I am, and I am saying that they're trustworthy.
That we can take.
Yeah. So that's okay. So we accept that. We accept that. If a person was considered trustworthy, but his wife was not considered trustworthy, we may purchase produce from him, but we do not accept hospitality because she's the one cooking. So she might be cooking something that Meiser wasn't taken. If his wife is trustworthy, then he is not. We may accept his hospitality, but we not purchase produce from him, right? He's selling, she's doing the hospitality. So we can have hospitality because we trust her. May a curse be visited on one whose wife is trustworthy, but he is not. Ooh. I don't know what he means to say that a curse should be visited or a curse is visited. It seemed more appropriate. It doesn't say that. Okay, a chaver should not serve as a waiter at a drinking party or a feast of a common person unless all the food and the drink have been tithed and the appropriate separations made under his supervision. Therefore, if he sees a chaver serving at a drinking party or a feast of a common person, he can operate under the assumption that the tithes and other separations have been made. So if a chaver is being serving, then you can assume that everything's okay. If we see such a person eating together with a common person, we cannot assume that the food served at the feast has been tithed. Perhaps the chaver is relying on the stipulation made in his heart. What he's going to say. Because you could tithe for yourself when tithes weren't taken, right? If food is sitting in front of you and you're not certain, you could tithe that food, right? Making a stipulation in your heart. It's actually in yesterday, yeah. So I'm serving, so I have the responsibility. But if I'm just a guest, I only have responsibility for myself. So I could be eating at a common person's place, and I could put aside stuff, and in my heart, I don't have to verbally say, but I put aside that this is, the Meiser, right? But I can only do it for myself because I'm only a guest. So if you see someone sitting at the table who's a chaver, it's not a proof that he's sitting at the table of a commoner that the commoner is okay to trust, right? Because you might have done that for yourself. In other words, you don't know what that person did. Now, obviously, you can go and ask, but that's not the point over here, right? You can ask the chaver, was this tithe or was it not tithe? Meaning, can I eat there? Can I not eat there? Right? So you can ask, but we're learning about what a person's doing. Can you, from that alone, take a cue? No. Number 7, just as a person may eat with a common person and rely on the conditions in his heart, so too he must make a stipulation with regard to what his son eats. This applies even if his son is in another place. He does not have to make a stipulation with regard to another person aside from his son, even if that person was together with him at the feast. Therefore, if the son is a chaver, if the son of a chaver is present at a feast with a common person, we cannot assume that the food was tithed, or perhaps the chaver made the stipulation for the food his son ate. So the son, I guess he himself is not a chaver, meaning he's not a learned person, but he's being trained this way. So, he's a 12-year-old boy, let's say, right? So the father might have made the stipulation for him and taken tithes for him. And I was at home, he would have taken tithes because tithing, you don't have to take it from that food. You can take it from other things, right? Actually, hmm.
At the focus.
What?
At your own home, you can take like some other things, yeah.
Yeah.
What about you? You could change something.
What?
No, you about you would think it differently.
I'm just trying to recall now. I can't remember all the details.
So,
With truma, you could not take the truma for the coin, the 2%, and it cannot be from a different species to a different, like I can't take apples and take tithes from that for grain.
okay.
So over here, I'm not exactly certain how you would do this. I don't remember now how you would do this because you know what the person's gonna, your son's gonna eat. You're sitting there, you know what you're eating.
It's food. It's
Okay,
food.
but you know, I don't recall now if like if you one species for another, you know, yeah, but the tithing, right? I don't recall now. I don't think you can take from, anyways. Okay. Okay, when a common person gives a mall, which is a silver coin that's not a lot of value to it, to a chaver and tells him, buy me a bunch of vegetables or a cake, he may purchase it for him without any qualifications and not obligated to tithe it. If the agent exchanged the ma, he's obligated to tithe the produce he purchased. Hmm. Because he's buying from a chaver and that chaver is going to tithe. If the agent exchanged the ma, he is obligated to tithe the produce he purchased. If the seller sees that the agent uses his own money, he might say that he is purchasing the produce for himself and is not for the common persons. Hence, the seller might not tithe the produce. Aha, because he, in other words, if the seller knows that he's being sold for a common person, so then he's going to tithe it, so he shouldn't sin. If he's not going, if it's going to the chaver, then he doesn't have to. So if he's taking his own money, how does he know that's his money or not money? Not exactly clear, but I guess he knows, right? If the chaver was explicit and did not buy the produce without explanation, but instead said, a bunch of produce that I am purchasing from you is being bought for my colleague, and this bunch is being bought for myself. He's obligated to tie only the produce he took for himself, does not have to tie the bunch and produce for his colleague. If the two batches of produce become intermingled, even if one measure belonging to the chaver became mixed with 100 belonging to the common person, he must make only separations as if the entire quantity was as if the entire quantity was demai. Only after maybe give the produce to colleague who sent him to purchase it for him. So now it got mixed up. His 1 in 100. So yeah, so it got now mixed up with his and the common person. He only took from his. So now he has to separate. Okay. When 5 people tell one person, bring us 5 bunches of vegetables. And the agent brings each person 1 bunch individually. The chaverim among the recipients are required to tithe only their portions. If the agent brought the entire quantity mixed together, among the recipients are required to separate tithes from the entire amount. Right. So because the portion that belongs to the chaver is not distinct. Since it's not distinct, so therefore he's part of a whole, so the whole needs to be tithed. When a common person tells a chaver, collect figs from me, from my fig tree, the chaver may snack from them and tithe them as one tithes demai. Right? You can eat it as a snack as you're working without tithing. Since it's a present, it's not a say, it's not like a sale. It's not that like as he purchased the figs from the common person, which then he would be required to take tithing, but it's like a gift, and therefore he can eat them, snack on them, and tithe them as one tithes demai. If you want to eat a significant amount of them, like a meal worth, then you have to tithe them. If a chaver told a common person to gather figs for him, that's the other way around. Before it was a common person telling the chaver, a trustworthy guy, right? Now it's a trustworthy guy telling the common person who's not trustworthy to gather figs, and another chaver heard him. The latter may partake of the figs without tithing them. The rationale is that the chaver will not release produce from his domain unless the appropriate separations were made. Right. Thus, we can assume that the owner separated truma and the tithes for this produce from other produce. Right. So he did it from other produce. We can assume that because he's trustworthy. Trustworthy means he's not going to get someone to do something that would, end up incorrect. Although generally we do not suspect the chaver will separate truma from the produce that is not in the same place as the truma, he may do so to prevent the common person from confronting a spiritual stumbling block. Number 11. It is permitted to feed the mai to the poor and to guests. They must, however, be notified as such. If the poor person or the guest desire to make the appropriate separations, they should. Because remember, the mai means from the common person who is untrustworthy. That doesn't mean they didn't take, but we're not assuming and we don't take their word. But for the poor, so this is a rabbinic law, right? But someone is poor, and I don't mean guests. Guests are considered like poor because they have to receive hospitality, right? So, so they're like poor in this instance, even though they might be literally wealthy. The collectives of charity collect from all people without clarifying whether separations have been made. And they divide the donation by specifications. If one desires to make appropriate separations, he should. So there's money collectors, right? For charity. That's their job. Now they collect and then they give out. So they're taking without any specifications. So it could be that it wasn't taken. then a person has to take. When a doctor who is a chaver is feeding a common person who is sick, from the produce of the common person, he should place the food in his hand and not in his mouth. Right? You're taking care of the sick, but it may not be, it's demai, right? It may be not properly taken care of. All right, so if the demai belongs to the doctor, he should not even place it in his hand. And similarly, if he knows that it's definitely temple, it's forbidden to place it in his hand. He should not. I guess the doctor's not a chaver then. That's what I'm understanding. All right, folks, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Great day.
Have a good day.
Thank you, Rabbi.